So it's become standard to say to people who are white, why should you be appointed given that you are white? Or to ask a lot of questions about the race of those that they have worked with over time.
The appointment of judges is a key component of the health and vitality of the judiciary, and the Judicial Services Commission is currently going through the process of appointing judges to the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal. Joining us to discuss this process is Advocate Mark Oppenheimer of the Johannesburg Bar. Mark, welcome back to the CRA channel. Could you tell our viewers about this process? How is the JSC constituted, and what is the process for judicial appointments?
So if we think about the separation of powers, the idea is that the different arms of government are checks on each other. So the legislature's role is to create the laws, the judge's role is to adjudicate upon the laws, and the executive's role is to execute upon the laws. And traditionally, the executive's role is to appoint judges. Now, in the States, for example, the president decides which judges are placed on their Supreme Court. What we have is a joint process. So you've got the Judicial Services Commission, which is made up of 23 different people from a variety of different sectors. So there are politicians, there is room for an academic, and there are some practitioners. And they interview the various candidates, and then they recommend candidates who the president then can ultimately appoint. The president can refuse to appoint people and ask for an additional set of names. Now, at the moment, we've gone through this 8-day period where judges have put their names forward for consideration, and some of that is for the Constitutional Court, and some of it is for other courts around the country as well. Now, there's something useful for the public in being able to watch this process, and that's they get a sense of what are these judges like, what are these candidates like who would like to become High Court judges, and then also importantly, what are the questions that are being asked by the JSC?
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
What are the qualities that the JSC should be looking for when making judicial appointments in terms of the track record of judgments, the character, and the orientation of the judges themselves? What are they going to be looking at?
Well, the Constitution has a starting point of sorts, which talks about candidates having to be fit and proper and having the relevant expertise. The Constitution also talks about a matter for consideration, not requirement, that the broad racial and gender demographics of the country be taken into account. Now, what we found is that this factor has become an overly large factor in a lot of the questions from the commissioners on the JSC. So it's become standard to say to people who are white, why should you be appointed given that you are white? Or to ask a lot of questions about the race of those that they have worked with over time. We've seen a lot less questions about what that person has actually done in their practice, either as an advocate or an attorney, if they want to become a High Court judge, or if they're already a judge and want to be elevated, what their judgments have been like. Now, the kinds of qualities that you want in a judge, you want someone who really has a very thorough knowledge of the law, someone who, especially in some of the busier divisions, is capable of dealing with different kinds of legal disputes, so that you're able to deal with, private law, criminal law, constitutional matters, public law matters. The nature of what comes up in practice is going to be quite broad. So those are important attributes. And then being able to pass the quality of their judgments as well. So getting a sense of, are you good at doing what you're supposed to do? And if we think about the process in America, where you have a judicial confirmation hearing run by the Senate, those senators will pay a lot of attention to judges' prior records. In other words, what did they decide in all of their cases? There's a real attention to detail in sense of, do you deliberate in a reasoned manner? What is your judicial philosophy? Those sorts of things. And we see a lot less of that in the questions coming from the JSC.
Clearly a tension there between the meritocratic considerations of what makes a good judge, and then also the transformation objectives, which are often quite poorly defined and essentially often reduced to the racial characteristics of the interviewees. But what about the JSC itself? It's comprised of politicians from national and provincial government, academics, and people from the profession as well. But there seems to be a clear bias in terms of the executive itself. There's a political agenda which seems to permeate through it. And many of the people who are sitting on that committee have themselves at some point faced allegations of corruption or other legal action against them. So is there not a conflict of interest there in terms of some of the representatives on the JSC and their fitness to make judicial appointments?
Yes, I think that's a legitimate concern. So, for example, if we think about someone like Julius Malema, who sits on the JSC, he's been involved in an enormous amount of litigation in the courts. And so the concern is that if you are interviewing a judge and the judge feels that in order to be elevated when he deals with the disputes that come before him, there's some incentive to play nice with the person who will play a role in your elevation, that seems like a problem. And so you'd probably want some kind of recusal mechanism for someone who's involved in active litigation and sits on the JSC, because at least there's a perception of bias, even if there isn't, a genuine bias that goes on.
So, Mark, there are a couple of candidates that I think stand out in this discussion. So the one is David Unterhalter, who's a High Court judge, somebody with extensive qualifications and experience both in South Africa and abroad. He's was a nominee or a potential nominee for the Constitutional Court. He was overlooked. Then you have somebody like Judge Roland Sutherland, who's a candidate for Deputy Judge President in South Gauteng High Court. So these are candidates who might not necessarily meet the quote unquote transformation criteria, but who otherwise have incredible merit to their candidacies. Do you care to comment on that at all?
So one of the questions that was put to Judge Sutherland was to make a comment on the fact that he is a white male. And Judge Sutherland stated that there is this requirement to broadly reflect the racial demographics of the country. And he noted that among deputy judge presidents in the country, only one of them is white. In other words, his appointment would be furthering that objective. Judge Sutherland is one of the most impressive judges that I've ever had the pleasure of appearing before. He is enormously talented, a brilliant writer. I've only ever had colleagues tell me how impressed they are in hearings because he displays an impeccable amount of wisdom in how he deals with things. He's also played an enormous role in restructuring that court. So the role of a deputy judge president really is to sort of play a leadership role for a particular division. So that's, there's a smooth running in terms of justice. And so one of his big achievements has been to reduce the amount of time that people have to wait to get into court for a trial, which has typically been about 1.5 years. And he's taken various measures that will reduce that down to about 4 months, which is an unbelievable achievement. On Judge Unterhalter, as you point out, he, as an advocate, has had an absolutely incredible career. He has appeared before the constitutional courts on numerous occasions, was even there before the final constitution had been put in place. He acted in the certification judgment, has acted in a number of big human rights cases for all those really that reside in South Africa. Their rights have been furthered by the litigation that has been run by Judge Unterhalter. And he's been a High Court judge for a period of 3 years. And what's disturbing is that the questions that were put to him largely focused on the fact that he was a member of the Jewish Board of Deputies. Now, the Judicial Services Act sort of regulates what judges can do, and it's quite clear that a judge can't be part of a political party, for example, but it makes it clear that a judge is entitled to be part of a charitable organization like the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, that Judge Unterhalter was asked to play a role on that during the pandemic when that community was, really imperiled by the sort of lockdown effects and and the other welfare requirements for people in old age homes. And so there was nothing improper at all about him taking on that role, which has no real political connotation, but was repeatedly asked about this. And a campaign was brought by the Black Lawyers Association and the Boycott, Disinvest, Sanctions movement to say that he should resign from that post, and that the BDS said that he should be ineligible for office on that basis. And this is the concern, that the JSC is latching onto the wrong issues. that very little time was spent talking about Judge Unterhalter's immense legal achievements and the value that he could add as a Constitutional Court judge.
Okay, Mark, so just to clarify the technicalities around this process, so Judge Unterhalter, he put his name forward but was not ultimately nominated by the JSC, and then Judge Sutherland, he was successfully nominated, but now the President, Ramaphosa, has to sign off on all of the nominations. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And with regards to the Constitutional Court, there are 2 vacancies and 5 people have been nominated by the JSC. So President Ramaphosa would have to make a selection as to which of those 2 candidates would actually wind up on the Constitutional Court.
Thanks very much, Mark. It's always a pleasure to have you on the CRA channel. Let us know what you think, our viewers, about this discussion. What do you think is the state of the judiciary at the moment? Is the pressure to transform having a negative impact on the quality of judicial appointments? Until next time, take care.